Hi, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Share Your Grin. Today, I very much wanted to talk to you about a psychedelic, weird, beautiful, fantastic, and one of the most artsy kind of premises that I've ever seen actually executed well. Sometimes artists can get a little hard to digest their actual medium that they're creating, whereas this one actually really does a cool thing, but also makes it, to me at least, enjoyable still, I guess. Ladies and gentlemen, today we're going to be talking about the Midnight Gospel. Now, the reason why this is just an interesting show, just for the idea that it presents, is it's taking a podcast, and it's taking a really well-known artist who makes really good TV shows, animated TV shows, and combining them together in this premise that essentially is this guy named Clancy who buys this world simulator, basically. So there's all of these decayed worlds that have long since passed, and then this computer simulates them, and he goes to those worlds in like a VR kind of simulation thing and interviews these people from these dead worlds. And he goes and interviews them typically on like the verge of their collapse, which is very interesting. And that's where like the podcast kind of melds to where that's why it's like this guy who interviews people from different worlds, but it's just this podcast of this fantastic individual named Duncan that actually interviews people from all kind of walks of life that all kind of seem to deal with like just different perceptions, so to speak. And a lot of those different perceptions seem to be caused by drugs that they may have taken, lives that they have potentially lived. Those lives may have been good or bad, but regardless, they have made a rather interesting person to talk to, and a person who has a pretty weird perception of the world. Maybe even the right perception of the world in some cases. That may be entirely based on your perception and whatnot, but regardless, that is the whole premise. Now, the story of the show is actually incredibly endearing, and that was the one thing that I heard from, I suggested this to you guys on podcast, or not in the podcast, on live stream when we were streaming and playing Borderlands. I was actually suggested you guys check the show out, and a lot of you guys checked back and said, yeah, it's kind of weird, maybe it's not for everyone, I kind of like it. Some of you guys said you really liked it, and one of the people I suggested it to on stream actually gave me like the first thing I heard negative about it, which is barely a negative, but it's basically somebody was saying in the chat that the one thing that they didn't like is that they introduced cooler ideas throughout the animation than sometimes they did in the podcast, essentially. But I also think that person didn't know that was the limitation of the art form as well, is that they were using like 90% podcast audio, basically, and then doing like supplementary, like maybe 10 minutes or a minute of like just them kind of trying to clean it up so that they could have a fundamental story going forward throughout the episodes. Anyways, that person's complaint was, I really like the world that they show more than the conversation that they're actually having. So I think the second episode is where you go to this world where it's like the amazing artists and animators kind of like trickle in this idea of like, okay, this is a world run by these weird like clown parasitic head leeches, but also there's like human beings and they're like kind of the resistance, but it's also maybe trying to do some sort of commentary on like fast food or farming or whatever. I'm just getting subliminal shit that I'm like, maybe that's what it is, I don't know. But the worlds that they show, and I'd agree with this to some extent, the worlds that they show are fucking interesting. Like sometimes more interesting than the conversations that they have, which I think just, to me, I see that as a kind of a positive. When the conversation to me is just kind of doesn't really connect at all, I'm not really resonating with what they're saying, I can always fall back on the crazy animation and just watching it as my eyes are just weirdly stimulated with this fucking weird nonsense, but also very cool and just a different way of storytelling, I guess. And that's something that I would like to say is that both I think everyone involved in the show is very keen on like this kind of style that seems to be kind of induced by, I don't know what the right wording is, changes of perception, oftentimes induced by drugs and whatnot. So the whole show has a kind of weird, I don't know, heliotropic or something like that, some sort of weird lens of distortion, but also that kind of gives it some charm and a hell of a lot of class. To its, or style, sorry, gives a hell of a lot of style. And on a side note, if we just want to slow things down a little bit, I actually wasn't sure if I wanted to watch the show just because I have so much other shit that I'm trying to watch, I think as most of us do, and we're just trying to chip away at it over time, and it keeps growing because people keep suggesting shit to us. By the way, how I even got suggested this in the first place is Joe Rogan podcast. It's a podcast I watch a lot, and Duncan's a consistent, fantastic guest on that podcast. And honestly, if you haven't seen some of those podcasts, I would highly advise watching them. He himself is just a very open-minded person who's like the best. I don't know. To me, it's like the best parts of some of those podcasts are the person just basically relaxing and just talking openly about the weird shit that they may be thinking about, without judgment, and just kind of fucking letting the weirdness flow. Like I'm one of those people that, as much as I don't want to be, I'm not like a conspiracy theorist, or I try to get, or I'm like, I'm in the loop on this insane thing. I'm not really one of those people, but I love having conversations about those things, you know what I mean? Like, I love conversations about aliens, I love conversations about what if this is a simulation, I love conversations about what maybe comes next, about what is these changes of mental spaces can be if they're induced by drugs or whatever they may be, having come from a person who has not had a single drug in his entire life besides maybe a Sinotab or a Tylenol. I still love all those things. I love having conversations about them because I think it's interesting. It's some of the best like bro dude conversations that you can have, as long as people don't go too hard into them and they're like, yeah man, we should revolt. And it's like, what? We're just having a conversation, my dude. So yeah, those podcasts specifically are very, very high in when it comes to those ones. Maybe both meanings of the word actually, but regardless, they're very, very enjoyable. And yeah, Duncan is very much that kind of person, it seems. But anyways, I wasn't sure if I was going to watch the series. I really like Duncan, and I kind of wanted to watch it just because it was something he made, and I kind of like the person that he is. I wasn't sold on it. Like, I wasn't sure I was going to watch it. Like, I added it to the folder of TV shows that I got to get to, but sometimes maybe never will. But it's there. At the end of the podcast, or towards the end of the podcast, where he's talking about the show he was working on, he said something that I was just like, oh, I got to watch that. Something that changed my perception of priority of watching this show. He said that the last episode of this series, it's not too much of a spoiler, I don't think, is actually on a podcast that he made with his mom that died 2 weeks later. And I was like, oh, wow, that's gotta be hard. And I feel like, just for like as a creator, you would, you'd want that, regardless of the conversation that you would have in that final episode. If you have any sort of love for your mom, you probably want to make that episode perfect and like a beautiful memory of her almost. So to me, I was just like, okay, not only is like the premise cool, I kind of dig the whole weird artsy idea of like, can this even be possible? You make a podcast into a compelling TV show? Absolutely. Apparently that is the case, because I really like it. And I also like the openness of how they're like exploring ideas. Some of the people we talk to, I'm just like, you're a bit deep. You're maybe too deep, but also, fuck it, let's hear you out and have a good conversation and think about it. But man, the whole reason why I wanted to make this and suggest this to you guys is because that final episode, man, just to come out with it straight up with it, I cried like a bitch. Just brutal tears, man. Normally I can fight it just a little bit to where like it gets in my eyes and like it's about to fall off, but it doesn't happen, and I'm just like, oh, I'm okay. But nah, man, having watched that, it may have just been I was like in a real weird moment. Didn't get a lot of sleep. Emotions were like on a just a thin line. But nah, man, I can bust it. It was like tears I felt in my beard and shit. Like shit just kept falling. It got into the seam of my nose and went into my mouth, and I was like, salty nastiness. Oh, also I have this fucking zit on the corner of my nose and like this bridge here, and it's just every time I move my face, it just fucking screams pain. Sorry. Yes. So I cried like a little baby. Why did you cry, Grin? Well, this is kind of going to get into some spoiler things, but also I feel like this is conducive to like the whole show. Is it does a really good job about like conveying ideas, and some people may argue that it doesn't. Some people may be like, it's just a bunch of weirdos talking, and they're talking about like hippie shit that I just don't resonate with. Sure, maybe rough, but okay, it's a way you could put it. Personally, I don't know. I find at the very least, it's an interesting conversation with these people who have like lived through extreme alcohol abuse, who have been in like domestic violence situations, who have come out the other side, and this is the way that they kept their mind together. If anything, I feel like that's really, really interesting. Like I feel like that's kind of an antidote to some of the merciless shit you may feel in the world, and a kind of a way that you can find your way back to who you want to be, I guess. Kind of like just giving value to those words and to these people he talks to. And not everyone is like that. Some of them are just really kind of weirdos who did a lot of drugs and have a weirder perception of the world. Still interesting to think about, I think. But anyways, this final episode, I was wondering if it like dealt with the subject matter of death. It did. It turns out his mom actually has had bone cancer of some sort, I think. Maybe getting some of these messed up. Hopefully you'll just be patient with me. But yeah, his mom had bone cancer, and they knew about it, and they made this podcast kind of talking about life and death. So to me, that immediately made the first time when I was watching the final episode, I was like, oh, okay, this immediately changed it from like kind of like a farewell card to your mom, and more of like your mom and you were both building this together in a weird way, So kind of change it to be like, oh, okay, so your mom is kind of a part of this message, I guess. And you watch the whole show, and it does this beautiful kind of weird shit to it shows you the cycle of life in a kind of a beautiful way. And throughout watching the show, and if you reminisce about what the last episode was, you can kind of piece it together. At least I do. Maybe I'm just slow, but whatever. The episode starts with basically Clancy, our main protagonist, being a child and meeting his mom again, and then his mom picks him up as a baby. And then they start just talking, interviewing his mom. She explains the day that he was born and the fun and goofy experiences that made him when he was born, as well as the kind of subliminal things with what it is to grow up, and how sometimes when if you are a older brother or an older sister, that you kind of grow up maybe a little too fast, and when your parents may put certain things on you that maybe they shouldn't have, because maybe you weren't supposed to grow up or have that level of responsibility, because maybe when you got older it made you hyper responsible. But with that being said, maybe people could take advantage of that responsibility, but you also just accept it because your parents kind of threw that on you, and regardless, they talk about stuff like that, as well as just many other things as they're progressing through looking at these Care Bears that are testing children, basically the same premise about seeing what could potentially affect a child, and make them grow up in a different way. What love is better than other love. And as they're going through this, Clancy, the main character, starts getting older and older, and of course his mom starts getting older and older and starts withering away. And eventually you get to the halfway point where essentially Clancy's mom is laying down on a bed filled with psychedelic looking mushrooms all around, and that's when I think they talk about the fact. No, maybe it's too quick. No, I think that's when they talk about. Yeah, that's when they talk about her having bone cancer, and there's this really beautiful moment that just is well done for as an art thing. Where his mom finally says, I have bone cancer, I'm gonna die, basically, or dealing with death, something like that. And then she closes her eyes as this old withered woman, and then the whole thing goes silent. The whole TV show just doesn't make any more noise, silent. And you just see our main character just explode, basically just scream and just crying his eyes out, and all that shit. And that to me was where the first wave of tears started happening, which is and I don't know about you guys, maybe you have it's different, but to me there is no I don't know I could do this. Oh no, I can't. Oh shit, I don't think I could do this. Let's drink some coffee and just fucking throw out the word. There's no greater fear that a man has than losing his mother. Shit, maybe I'm just a pussy, but regardless, yeah, man, there's of all the things in the world that are just fucking scary, just fucking gut-wrenching, and it's not even just your mom, man, if it's your dad as well, it's all those things. But, and it's kind of and I think they kind of harken about this in the episode, but it's the people that show you, hopefully, I can't attest to like the people who've had really hard childhoods, but if you have a somewhat good parents, your parents show you how to love. They show you how to love deeply. And God help you if they're supportive and they're kind and they're there for you. Anyways, then this is where the show gets kind of weird in the episode, but it's kind of beautiful for what it's trying to showcase at least. But then Clancy, after crying and whatnot, and I think like a dollop of water lands on him and he basically becomes pregnant. Now, it turns out Clancy is in fact a man, but his mom and them are talking still in this kind of thing. He gives birth to this child, and of course it is his mom. And then they go forward in life, basically showcasing that this is something that everyone will deal with, and that's something that they later talk about. This is the cycle of life that connects everybody, and this is this cycle of death, but not even just death, but this cycle of like horrible pain. But that pain is a reflection of how deeply you love this person. So it's something that is like beautiful and something that you should feel and cherish, but also that no one would ever want to feel, because it's losing the people that you hopefully love most in the world. And that's something that connects us all, and something that like everyone will have to go through. You know what I mean? So that's what the thing is showcasing, and the next half of the episode is his mom and him talking, as he's raising her, basically like holding her hand as they're going through these like Care Bear Hall windows, and he's getting older, and they both start talking, and then he starts to wither away and gets ready to die, and then that just shows the cycle. And I think in this instance, it's trying to showcase that it's not that he gave birth to his mom; it's that he became a parent. And that eventually your kid will eventually have to deal with the pain of you no longer being there. And maybe people will say, well, then it's such a horrible pain that no one could possibly want to feel. But again, the pain is only good because you raised that person. You were there for that person the entire time, so that pain is inevitable. You have to feel that pain. Because if you do want to love something as much as hopefully a parent loves their child, then you will have to feel the loss of that parent no longer being there anymore. And that sucks. That's so shitty, but it's such a shitty thing that does connect every single person. Every single person has felt that level of pain, or will eventually feel that level of pain. It is only conducive to how much love you have for that person, which again, if you have a good parent and you have good memories, then that's a shit ton of fucking pain. And then it's one of those shows or one of those episodes that I probably will watch again, because it talks about a lot of interesting things about like how to be present and how to deal with stuff like that, how to deal with that like soul crushing pain, even if it's not induced by a loved one dying, but instead the world just taking a shit on you after shit on you after shit on you. Which is her advice. His mom, who had cancer. What was it like? She had cancer where doctors were telling her that she only had 4 months to live, but then she ended up living like 4 or 5 years or something. So his son asks her, like, how do you deal with that? How do you deal with this? Like, for people out there who are getting shit on by the world, how did they deal with that pain and suffering, I guess? And one of the things she suggests is this sense of being present in the moment. And she gives an exercise I think is genius about how to be present in the moment. And I felt real weird when I did it. I did it live when he was doing it, and I was like, oh shit, this actually really works in a weird way. And I've never been good with meditation at all. My brain just decides to go. But this was a way to kind of get outside your head by making your brain proactive in a weird way. So the way I'm gonna butcher this. You should definitely go watch. If anything, just watch the final episode. It's a show that's worth watching. But if that final episode to me if you haven't cried in a while, probably watch it. Or maybe it was just that I'm in a weird place. I just bawled cause I don't know. Regardless, the thing that she tells people to do is to focus on the inside of your hand, then work your way up to your arm, then work your way up to your other arm. And then work your way to your legs, feeling the inside of your hands, both arms, both legs, and then the rest of your body. And it's weird because it's not like, it's like feeling the inside of your hand, not like touching yourself. Like, no, I'm talking like inside blood, skin, shit like that. So just feel it. And so far you kind of start to feel maybe like a little tingle in your hand, maybe like a little bit of like your brain is in your hand kind of vibe feeling, and it climbs up your whole body as you do the whole thing. And after you feel your entire body, and she says in a really cool way, which I felt like really articulated what you kind of should do and what you should feel. But she says, and then turn on your ears and your eyes and accept whatever that is. And I did it with my eyes closed, but I'm not sure if you're supposed to keep your eyes open. But I did it with my eyes closed, and I seen like a thing, and I heard, weirdly, I seen a beach. Don't know why. I seen a beach overlooking a sunset, and I heard the wind and all these things, and I was like, weird, very weird. And then it went away real quick because I was like, what the fuck is happening? And then I kind of got startled out of it. But I came out of it being like, whoa. Is that what presence is? And that's like, you're basically forcing yourself to stop thinking and just focus on your body, and then that carries over. Really interesting way of doing this meditational thing. But yes, ladies and gentlemen, I really, really hope there's more of this weird ass show. It is incredibly enjoyable, very strange. I love the concepts of it, and that's something that I kind of would hope that they would do. Is I really, really do hope that they, like, as much as I do love, and I mean love, like the interviewing and the podcast, like merging, I would love it if, like, out of the 13, or what is it, like 10 episodes, hopefully it's like 13 episodes in the future, out of like maybe 3 or 4 of those episodes were just like actual weird like plot, you know what I mean, like cartoon thing, like without any sort of like being forced with this restriction of having to do a podcast interview. If it could just be like Clancy being a weirdo in the world and doing shit, you know, and etc. I also kind of am sad that, like, I really loved the idea of like Clancy becoming some sort of like god almost, because he throughout his journey of just being a good guy, trying to interview people, just trying to have an open mind, he got a rose that could heal everything. He got like a puppy of like that holds the universe in his stomach, and all this weird shit. And I was really, really hoping that he would like slowly start to acclimate a bunch of overpowered gear, and like maybe his neighbor would come by and be like, what the fuck? You got the rarest shit ever. What happened? I would love that, but unfortunately, it doesn't quite look like that's happening. It looks like it's gonna experience more of like the weird death, rebirth shit in the simulation weirdness, and maybe it's gonna talk about like, wait, are we in a simulation? Fucking what? Yeah, it is like definitely, it's definitely my cup of tea, the show in general, just because of the of like, I've always been that person. I've always loved having like any conversation you want to have with me kind of thing. Like especially if it's real strange and it's just having a fun conversation. Where I depart is when people start getting like too into it, like, oh, I'm gonna change my whole life because, you know, Y2K weirdness, and I'm like, okay, we're just talking, what happened? You like took a turn. Okay, anyways guys, I would highly suggest the show. It is a bunch of weirdness, but also an utter delight. I really hope there's more, which I think there is. It was very popular on Netflix, so hopefully we get more seasons of it. Also Duncan seems like just a wonderful human being, totally weird, and all that lovely stuff. But anyways, ladies and gentlemen, would highly advise you watch the show. May not be for everybody, but it was definitely for me, and I enjoyed it greatly. Hopefully you guys enjoy the rest of your day. Subscribe button over there, as well as 2 videos further that way. Thank you kindly for your time, and goodbye. Also, I'm sorry I teared up like a little baby. Anyways, bye.